CBS News has learned that President Biden is expected to sign an executive order focusing on equality today, and it will target racism against Asian Americans. So Ed O'Keefe is tracking this development for us from the White House. He's joining us this morning. Ed, we're going to start here and talk about all the other things going on with the administration. But this is so fascinating to me, particularly when you consider the way the previous president would talk and his final addresses to the public. He was still calling the coronavirus the China virus. And so here we have this really interesting executive action. What can you tell us?
That's right. Well, CBS News has learned that today, in a series of executive orders set to address issues of equality, one of them is designed to address recent racism or anti-Asian bias that's been sparked in the past year by the pandemic. This has been an especially big concern for Asian American business owners and others on the street and on social media who've been attacked by people claiming that they're at fault for starting this virus. And of course, it didn't help that we had a president who was calling it the China virus. We're not entirely clear on what exactly is in this, but based on conversations we've had with people familiar with the process, they say it's going to basically try to address anti-Asian bias or animus towards Asian Americans. This is something that a lot of Asian American leaders, politicians, business groups have been pushing for over the past year, something that sort of formalizes the federal government's respect for the community amid the pandemic.
All right, let us continue with how this administration is planning to address the pandemic. Negotiations are underway over a new coronavirus relief package. Now, President Biden told reporters yesterday that he was willing to negotiate when it came to the eligibility threshold for that $1,400 stimulus check. So tell us, what are we talking about here? Is this, raising the income level or different restrictions? And what sort of impact could this have on Americans?
Well, that's what's up for debate. Bottom line, remember, many Americans got a $600 stimulus check or are expecting one based on the legislation that was passed in December that cost about $900 billion. There had been a push to give $2,000 in direct relief to struggling Americans that met the qualifications. And so what this legislation is designed to do is to make up the difference, the $1,400. There are others who say, no, give us $2,000 so that we get $2,600. Others who are saying, look, this is potentially going to be giving money to people who don't necessarily need it, who are still employed, unlike many others who are not and who are struggling more. So what you heard him say was that, and this was one of the sticking points with the senators who spoke out after their meeting with White House officials on Sunday afternoon about this. They said, look, interesting proposals here, quite expensive. Maybe we should consider breaking this up a little bit into smaller pieces. And one of the issues that they thought needed to be addressed is who exactly would be eligible for this money, under what conditions, and how might the sliding scale work if you make a certain amount, like on the low end, say $40,000, versus somebody who's making like $100,000. Does the amount you receive change based on your income level? All of those things he's perfectly fine to negotiate. In his view, it's still one big package. He'd like to see it worked out. And he's also asking for patience, saying that he expects it'll take several weeks for something to be worked out. You listen to the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer last night in an interview. He suggested he wants to get this done very quickly, like later this month or early February, right before and right after the impeachment trial. The president seems to be giving it a little more room, knowing that these kinds of negotiations, especially ones with a $1.9 trillion price tag, can take a little while.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, indeed. So still with the coronavirus, we just have learned that the Brazilian variant of the virus, the one that came from Brazil, is now here in this country after somebody visited Brazil and came back. The president also took action now to limit international travel into the U.S. in light of this pandemic. What can you tell us about this move?
Yeah, in many ways, he's putting back in place what was already there for most of the Trump presidency. It was just on January 18th that they announced, the Trump administration did, that he was lifting the ban on travel from the United Kingdom and from Europe and Brazil. The Biden administration putting that back in place and saying that anyone who's coming into the country is basically going to have to show proof of a negative COVID test. Most non-U.S. citizens will be barred from coming into this country. They also added South Africa to the list of countries with a travel ban, given the variant that's been found there. Not necessarily something that the United States wants to be doing, but there is a public health risk, and that's why the travel ban will continue. This is one of many, you can look at it in this way, one of many things that the Biden White House is doing to either undo a Trump administration policy or put back in place something that had existed that President Trump had undone from the Obama years.
Yeah. So speaking of the previous administration and the impending impeachment trial of former President Trump, we haven't really heard much from President Biden in terms of, commenting on the impeachment, but he did speak to CNN yesterday. CNN is reporting that he told them that the impeachment trial has to happen. That was his quote, suggesting that it sort of has to happen for the country. How do these comments compare to the little that we have heard from President Biden about the impeachment proceedings?
Well, and we should point out that CNN just happened to run into him here in the hall in the West Wing. This was an off-camera thing. I'm frankly looking forward to running into him at the coffee machine later today and asking him for his opinion on, the Super Bowl or something, and more serious matters. Look, in this case, this is a slightly more candid assessment of the situation than he's expressed before, but it's consistent with what many Democrats, at least, and critics of the president believe, and that is that he has to be held accountable for what happened on January 6th, and that this trial at least has to be held. Even if he isn't convicted, he will have been impeached by the House, and the Senate needs to consider the article of impeachment against him. This is something they weren't expecting in the course of the transition. They were hoping initially to spend these first few weeks of January not only signing all these executive actions and orders, but also starting to get the process rolling on COVID relief legislation, immigration reform legislation, working on some issues related to climate change, and instead they've got to deal with cleaning up the last presidency. And he understands, as somebody who is an institutionalist, that people have to be held to account, and so he's going to work around it. There remains no evidence as of right now that 17 Republican senators would join the 50 Senate Democrats to convict the president. Regardless, there are people in this town who understand, Democrats especially who now control the Senate, that the trial has to be held, the charges have to be heard, the evidence needs to be presented. What's still yet to be worked out is who, if anyone, might testify, how long the trial might take, and what effect that might have on the ability of the Biden White House to get things done with Congress.
Yeah, and to what you just said, CNN is also reporting that President Biden said that he didn't think there would be enough senators to convict.
Right.
So White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki announced yesterday that the Treasury Department was going to move forward with efforts to add Harriet Tubman to the $20 bill. This whole idea was introduced during the Obama administration. Trump administration sort of shelved it indefinitely. What does the timeline look like for this process?
Could take a little while. This isn't something that they can just snap their fingers and make happen, in part because currency is very difficult to make manipulation proof. And, part of the frustration when the Trump administration reversed the decision was that they knew this was going to set it back even longer. When President Obama first introduced the idea, they cautioned that it could take several years because you got to redesign this bill. You got to make sure that all the various mechanisms that are on your piece of currency actually, are safe from counterfeit. They also realize that they've got to print a lot of 20s because that is one of the more popular pieces of currency, especially when it comes to ATMs. And so it could take a little while. Of course, like most things these days on social media, there were people who said about this that it could take a little while. But the reality is, given pressures on the currency office right now to continue producing money that's needed as people are spending more time at home and perhaps using more cash, and the safeguards that need to be taken, they warned it could take several years. But either way, this president is now committed to trying to make it happen and make good on a promise that was started by 2 presidents ago.
Yeah, definitely. I would say that it would be a long time coming. Ed, thank you very much.